back to Season 2 of Pack the Rod podcast, brought to you by the Hoosier Network. I'm your host, Audrey Marr, and I'm joined by Carlo Barone, Kylee Corman, and a special guest, Mason Williams, who is a senior writer for thehoosier.com. Mason, welcome. Carlo, Kylee, how's everyone doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm good.
Doing well, Audrey.
I'm excited to be here. This is fun. We've talked about this for a few weeks, but now we're week
finally doing it.
Now it's finally happened.
I made it out of the group chat.
You can say that.
All right, so in episode 6 of the season, we'll be going over the Louisville game and giving our thoughts, some predictions for Indiana's final non-conference game against Akron this Saturday, and we'll be answering some questions from you guys that we got on X and Instagram today. But starting us off, what a game that was on Saturday, guys. We'll do a deep dive into it, but Mason, I'll start with you. What were your overall takeaways from the game?
It was like they played two games. The first game was the first half, and they didn't look like they belonged on the same field as Louisville. And then they come out at halftime, they call an onside kick to the surprise of not only everybody in the building, but about half the team on the sideline. And they just kind of rode that momentum the entire time throughout the second half. I think there's a lot of good positives to build off of. In that second half, we'll get into later some of the reasons why there's still a kind of a sour taste in your mouth coming out of this game if you're Indiana, because it kind of feels like a missed opportunity. But at least it feels like one in my eyes. I feel like looking back in November, they'll probably wish they had that game if they're nearing on 4 or 5 wins, something along that lines. But I think there's a lot of good to take out of this. There's some bad that's still nagging around, but I think Akron this weekend kind of provides an opportunity to really tune up some of those last few nagging things before you get into the meat of conference play. So,
yeah, I mean that first half was brutal. I just kept thinking if I was an Indiana fan, I wouldn't have drove an hour up here for that game either. Like you could very easily have watched that from your couch or KOK, as many students chose to do. But the second half was just a completely different ball game, but you have to be able to play 2 halves of football.
I think Mason made a good point with the onside kick, how they kind of rode the momentum after that. That kind of sparked a, wait, Indiana is alive here in the sense in the game. That surprise onside kick, I was about to go get a drink in the press box, and I watched the kickoff, and then...
Very committed reporter, Carlo.
Yeah, well, I was about to go get one up, and I saw 30 seconds cherry Coke, probably. No, but I was about to get a drink, and I was like, all right, I'll watch the kickoff, and I'll run up and go do it. And then it's an onside kick, and I'm gotta, do my job there real quick. But
do your job.
Yeah,
That's right.
I know, crazy concept.
Pull out the graphic.
Yeah, you're right. But that was a crazy second half, and like Mason said, it's 2 different ball games. They played. I think they were one more drive away from probably scoring and going to overtime. They're literally 1 yard short. So
less than that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think overall it was, like Mason said, a missed opportunity, especially if they get close to that 6th win for bowl eligibility. This is one they'll be thinking about, but I think you have to feel good with how they played the second half, and if they can take that momentum into this Akron game, tune up whatever they need to do and ride that momentum into Big Ten play, they could have a nice start. They do play Michigan the second Big Ten game, so that's going to be a little hard, but they got...
Out of a bye week, though.
They got some winnable games at the start, for sure.
I do want to say that going back to the first half, yes, they didn't. I should correct. They did look like they belonged on the field, on the same field as Louisville. They had some drives. They just didn't capitalize. They didn't finish. They moved the ball well. It kind of felt like one or two things went wrong, and then Louisville scored so easily where it was very easy. It felt like the energy just kind of left the Indiana sideline. That onside kick sparked something. Indiana scores within 3 plays. Then the defense gets off the field. They go score again in that third quarter, and all of a sudden it's a 1-score game. And you're looking an hour ago in real time, that wasn't even possible to reasonably think that Indiana was in that game. But because they found energy, and I think once they got down on themselves a little bit in the first half, and the defense was kind of getting pushed around by the Louisville offense, and that's no joke of the Louisville offense that they held scoreless in the second half too. So I think it kind of just snowballed in the first half, and they really just needed to get to halftime, because once once they came out at halftime, I know we've kind of beat a dead horse here to say that it was a completely different ballgame, but it was. I mean, Indiana completely dominated that second half. So
The offense the first half, though, I think it looked pretty bad. I mean, Taven was overthrowing all his receivers, and I mean, Donovan McCulley's 6'5", and he was still overthrowing him. That's just like, you can't, that's not unacceptable. But the second half, I thought he was really good, and kind of little bits and pieces, a few plays here and there, I could kind of see what Walt Bell is talking about when he says NFL.
I think he was just anxious. I think there was just some jitters to it.
I was genuinely wondering if Sorsby was gonna get in.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was
very good at first.
I think it was definitely some first start jitters in the start, and obviously you could tell he wasn't comfortable with the play calls that were being called. It wasn't that he was not comfortable with the calls. He just didn't, I don't think, know it off the top of his head as well. But you guys all kind of talked about it. First half was obviously pretty quiet on both sides of the ball. Going into halftime down 21-0. Obviously, it came out with the onside kick and got it. Along with that play, a lot of standout plays in the second half. What all worked in the second half for Indiana?
I thought they did a good job of pressuring the quarterback, and Aaron Casey blew up more than just that one play where he took down two people at the same time. I mean, they were hitting Plummer, and by the end of the game, that man had to wake up and feel something the next day. So I think they talked about how they needed to pressure the quarterback more, but also after the game, they talked about how they need to clean up the coverages down the field. I forgot who we talked to after the game, but they said that was like their main adjustment. They just had to hold each other accountable and doing correct defensive play calls. And they tightened up, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the third quarter, I don't think Louisville had a single passing yard the entire quarter, which is crazy to think. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but I remember
I want to say they had like 30-something when I last checked.
Very little, but I mean, for an offense that had an 85-yard touchdown like 2 plays after they got the ball back, and like Mason said, they kind of just sucked the life out of that half. They played extremely well, and they put themselves in a position to win the game, and they came 1 yard short.
Yeah, I mean, in the first half, the defense was just getting beat on routes and giving up, giving up super, like, easy scores. I mean, I don't think Louisville really worked all that hard, especially that one bomb. Like, I don't know.
Matt Guerrieri kind of talked about it a little bit on Monday, kind of the individual breakdowns that happened. I mean, Jamari Thrash for Louisville just kind of took the top off of Indiana's defense a couple times. And I'm not sure if I can't remember off the top of my head if any of you guys covered football last year, but it was very eerily similar to... Yes, Carlo did.
Nice to meet you, Mason.
I said off the top of my head, okay? Anyways, back to football talk. It kind of reminded me eerily of the Cincinnati game last year, where kind of Ben Bryant in that Bearcat passing attack just continually like got behind the defensive second level and the final level of Indiana's defense, and they just like whatever they wanted to do through the air, they did in that game against Cincinnati, or in that game versus Cincinnati, the Bearcat offense did. And this year it was the same thing in that first half. They still got away with one in the second half, where it came back, I think, because of a holding penalty, where Plummer like kind of escaped left. It was a weird play, and Thrash got open again.
That was a crazy throw.
That was crazy, because running to his left down the sideline, threaded it in, and then Thrash stayed in bounds. But that play came back because of the penalty. But I think just the individual breakdowns kind of shored up, and they played more cohesive. It was more of a group effort in the second half, and I think that obviously combined with Taven settling in, the offense opening up the playbook and playing more like they needed to. Taven was talking yesterday on Monday about how they played like they were playing from behind, and they knew they had to take some shots. Well, maybe they could play like that the entire game because they have the guys to do that. So I think when you look at some of the takeaways for Indiana from this game, you'll look at the play calling in the second half, aside from a couple different play calls in that second half. Do
you have any in mind?
There is one that kind of sticks out.
Really?
Yeah, and we'll get into that. But
we'll get into that.
But the play calling was overall much better. But I mean, it ended on a sour note with that regard. So it's kind of hard to look at that and recognize the positives that came out of it. But that's where I stand right now.
I feel like a lot of this season has been, yeah, this happened, but there's good things to look at. Like, there's, like, the Ohio State game. Oh, well, the defense looked good. Indiana State. Well, the offense looked good. Like, we're going into week 4 now. At what point in the season can you say, okay, it's, like, you have to get everything together? Like,
you gotta win.
Right.
That's a good point.
What are you going to do? It's going to be the last game of the season against Purdue. And, well, I mean, Jalen Lucas looked really good. Hopefully he's still with India. Like, you can't just keep looking towards the future like that. You got to really just
at some point you have to close the deal.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There's been like a silver lining with each of these games. It's like, oh, they lose to Ohio State, but the defense looked good, like we mentioned. But this week's got to be...
When you're trying to get into a bowl game, it's not...
A Power 5 team in the Big Ten.
They looked good
can we
against
also just, like,
you gotta win.
With reference to that Ohio State game, can we just, like, be truthful and say that they weren't really trying to win that game? They were just trying to not get blown out.
Oh,
The
yeah.
play calling was
100%.
absolutely way too conservative to try and win.
You can even hear that in the answers they said on the Monday
They were saying it without
presser.
saying it.
They pretty much said it. They were like, well,
It's
it's
pitter-pattering.
Ohio State, so you got to be careful. Well, no,
much
it's a
pitter-patter.
game you're supposed to win. You're absolutely right. They weren't trying to win that game. They were trying to figure out who their quarterback was, and they still didn't really get an answer.
I just think in the Louisville game, the play calling in this entire second half was, well, we have to come back. We've got no other option. We're staring down a 21-point
They were
hole.
taking risks.
Right.
And that's something I said right after the Ohio State game. You have to start taking risks. Like, when you're coming from behind, what's the matter? You're down 21-0.
What's there to lose at that
There's
point?
nothing to lose.
I think part of it has to do with the fact that either quarterback you had so far throughout the season and probably throughout the rest of the season now is a redshirt freshman, and you don't really have a whole lot of game experience with either of them. So you kind of are just, last year, Carlo, you were there.
I was.
When they were talking about trying to not overload Jalen Lucas too much, but they were still trying to find him ways to get the ball, everybody was kind of like, well, just like, can't you just really do that by giving him the ball and then seeing what he can and can't do? I think that's kind of the approach they need to take with the offense this year is like, well, just kind of open it up, see what works, see what doesn't. Don't be afraid to take some risk and have it come back at you in a negative facet, because what if it doesn't, right? Like, you have to, at some point, find out what you have. And if you're playing,
conservatively,
if you're only playing at 75% of your true, potential, then how are you ever going to figure that out?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, let's kind of get into that big play calling question. I mean, the biggest play of the game was definitely that 4th and goal following Taven Jackson's Michael Penix Jr. run into the pylon. What were your guys' thoughts on that play call, having Josh Henderson bring it in for that touchdown? At least try to.
This isn't going to be a popular answer, but a lot of people are going to hate on Henderson for not getting in there. But if you look at the offensive line that play, it was abysmal. They had played a great game at that point, but they got no push whatsoever, and Josh Henderson really had no chance to get in. I think it was a terrible call. In my opinion, I feel like I'm not a football coach, but I'm not even close. But in my, football knowledge, my understanding is that coaches usually have a couple plays that they don't really run until you get to those situations, or a 4th and 1 where you need to convert maybe on the final drive. In this instance, it's to tie the game, pretty much, bearing the extra point. At what point, why don't you just run one of those plays that is probably 95% of the time going to work? With the game on the line, with a program like this, Allen, I mean, he knows how much he's lost the last couple of years. He knows how much his buyout is. Every year it goes down. I mean, you'd be lying to say if it's not in the back of his head that he knows that pressure's on. In a game like this, Lucas Oil, your first start with your guy that you just named the starting quarterback, why not run one of those plays? Unless Allen doesn't have them.
I think you bring up a good point with the play sheet. There's always like one or two plays where this is like their surefire, right? And there was the drive where Indiana cut it to 7, and Indiana ran a similar play where they ran from 2 yards out, Josh Henderson, through to tackles or through to guards up the middle of the offensive line, and he got into the end zone, partially because he kept turning his legs, but also that was a much different defensive look and offensive look that was provided. With this particular play call, all 11 Louisville defenders are lined up within a yard of
They're all right
the line
there.
of scrimmage. Every single Indiana player is lined up within 1 yard of the line of scrimmage, except for Josh Henderson, who's standing at the 8-yard line. And I know that you can look at the execution of the offensive line and be like, well, this wasn't right. This wasn't here. This wasn't there. The Indiana offensive line, run blocking wise, was not substantial enough to count on that play to work. Passing wise, they protected Taven well, and he had some really nice pocket presence as well. He stayed clean, and I know we'll talk about it later, but Taven's going to reward his guys for that. But the offensive line run blocking wise against Louisville's front seven was not up to the standard that it needs to be for that player to be surefire for it to work. You're asking Josh Henderson, who's not even your biggest back in the running back room, if you're going to run this play and ask somebody to bruise it, you have Trent Howland on your roster. If you're going to try and ask somebody to beat somebody on the outside, you have Jalen Lucas on your roster. Josh Henderson is not a bad back by any means. He's a very talented back, but you're asking a lot of him to start at the 8-yard line when everybody's already at the goal line and say, have at it, man. Try and jump over. He gets stuffed at like the 2-yard line. They actually lost yardage on the play because it just didn't work up front. So I'm not sitting here saying I have a better play call. I don't think a QB sneak would have necessarily worked either because for the same reason, the offensive line, maybe you need to run outside of the tackles. Maybe you put the ball in the air. I was kind of upset that they took the ball out of Taman's hands because, he was almost Superman in that second half and leading them back. He was essentially the reason he and the offense clicking as a whole was kind of the reason why Indiana's even in that situation outside of the defense really shoring up in that second half. So I know Allen said afterwards they weren't going to second guess it, but also in that answer said, well, yeah, obviously it didn't work. We wish we could do something else, but
that's just kind of an obvious answer. Like,
yeah,
it didn't work. Like, yeah,
right, yeah.
we would have liked to score. That would have been nice.
Yes, clearly it didn't work. I'm not sitting here and saying I have the answer that would have worked, but I just don't know how you can necessarily feel like that was your best one in the canon. You know
There's
what I mean?
just no way. I remember I texted my family in the family group chat. They're gonna run it up the middle, and they're not gonna make it. And that's exactly what happened.
They took a timeout right before too.
So
Yeah.
not only was there a timeout, but there was the review to see if Jackson had got to the pylon.
And that's what they came up with.
They had all that time. Just run a play that you run in
I was doing an
Madden.
article of like Jackson's day minute by minute, right? So I was like taking note. That was over 3 minutes of real time that Indiana had between the pylon dive happening and them lining up for that run up the middle for them to decide. Plus, like you mentioned, the timeout plus the pylon review. Like that's. I struggle to reason. I struggle to reason and see where that was Indiana's best play call in that moment.
Even if you leave it with Taven, he's big enough, he's athletic enough. Get the offensive line to do a little. He just needs to jump up and over, and that's it. Maybe that's a little bit easier than it sounds.
Right.
But he is at least...
Kylee would have scored. Let's be honest, guys. If Kylie's under center, she's punching
probably.
that in, no question.
Absolutely. But I'm just saying he's athletic enough he could do a little up and over.
Okay, so also like there was a complete not reliance, but there was an obvious emphasis in Indiana's offensive game plan, right, to run Taven Jackson, like predominantly, not as like an improvisation thing, but like they ran QB draws for him. They ran QB power. He was involved a ton in the option game. Why not maybe run a bootleg? Syracuse ran it twice against Purdue, and it worked to perfection. There's videos of it on Twitter. Look it up. Syracuse ran like a perfect quarterback bootleg where the play action, everybody on Purdue's defense thinks that the running back has the ball for Syracuse, and then the Syracuse quarterback just scampers easily for like 15 yards to essentially seal the game. Like there were so many. You have a bootleg. You can run outside of the tackles. You could sneak it. You could do anything. He's lined up 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Like that's asking a lot of Josh Henderson to do. That's what I always come back to is like maybe the dive works with execution, but it's still a tough ask when he's the only guy that's not right at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
This brings me back to a game in, I think it was 2013 when Peyton Manning was on the Broncos. Really random reference, but I remember watching the game. They were playing the Cowboys. The final score was like 50-something to 40. It was a really high-scoring game.
Was this a 7-touchdown game to begin?
No.
Okay.
That was against the Ravens. This one's against the Cowboys, same season, though. He had the ball. I think it was 4th and goal from the 1-yard line. Literally same situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same formation. All 11 guys from the Cowboys were there. All 11 guys for the Broncos were there. And Peyton took the snap, and he acted like he was giving the ball to Noshawn Moreno up the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And the fake was unbelievable. Everyone went for it, and Peyton just took the ball and walked in.
That probably also works partially because it's Peyton Manning. He's not really mobile runs.
But I'm saying in that situation, if all 11 guys there, Taven's also a little bit more mobile than Peyton Manning was at age whatever he was.
Peyton Manning was a statue for most of his career.
Especially in the final few with the Broncos, especially that 2015 season, he was not good. But my point being, even a play like that, you get Taven on the outside, all he's got to do is just beat the edge, and he's in. You can even have Jalen Lucas have run a similar play. It's just basically a foot race to the end zone, and Jalen's probably going to win that 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're all sitting here and talking about it because it didn't work, right? Kind of the same way, the same reason that Alan mentioned it. He's like, well, yeah, it didn't work. Well, obviously, yeah, we're sitting here and we're talking about it so much because it didn't work. And then the defense,
they sold.
Whoa. I don't know about that. Like, that's
two plays from the 1-yard line, they're already out to the 30.
Yeah.
The quarterback break and contain
the game.
is tough. But also, they only had one timeout. The timeout management, you get into a whole different conversation there.
Don't even.
Because you have the drive in the first half, talking about timeouts, you have the drive in the first half where there's a timeout, a dump off pass to Lucas, and then a timeout again. And then Alan said that you would like to have at least 2 for that final drive. Indiana only had 1. Obviously, that defensive breakdown was crucial at the time, but that's asking a lot of a defense that had already blanked that Louisville offense the entire half to be like, can you give us one more shot? That's
you gotta just
a lot.
do it yourself. And I mean, yeah, this game is defined by that play and always will be. There was a whole first half, a whole 30 minutes of more opportunity, and they could have scored then. They could have stopped the touchdown there.
Yeah.
I mean, so, yeah. And Alan talked about that. You're always going to wish you did something different, and everyone's going to point to this play, but there was a whole other half of football.
That's why I keep coming back to missed opportunity.
Right.
One or two plays different, and you're talking about a 2-1 team maybe, and you're looking at the rest of the outlook on the rest of the season. You're like, well, this team could surprise some people. Well, now you're sitting here wondering. Again, with Indiana football, it's always like this. What could have been? I think I wrote in in a column that's it's a program that's forever stuck in its own way. At some point you have to get out of it. They could have done that Saturday, but one thing goes wrong, it didn't.
Has Galen told you about the Reddit thread that every time that Indiana football is good, the world is just gone?
I think
AWOL.
I think you brought it up in a class, right?
Yeah,
Sports media literacy.
It was the same. I was in class with you, but it was 2020. It was the pandemic.
Wait,
they were good
it.
During World War II. It's
take a sports media literacy class.
I did.
I am. I'm actually in it right now.
Talk about it that time.
Oh, maybe it was because it was so fresh when we did we took that class. But I mean, this sitting next to some of the people in the press box that have been covering these games forever. It's kind of like they were even conversing between themselves is well, we kind of know how this ends. And Indiana had a chance to flip the script, do something different, and couldn't get out of their own way.
Stayed with the conservative play call.
One of my best friends was in town she's a Louisville fan, and she was texting me oh my God, they're going to score. And I was like, it's Indiana. It's okay. You don't have to worry about it. You can just always know. Very predictable.
They'll find a way to find a way to surprise you for sure. But
they find a way to surprise you, but at the same time you feel well, I've seen this movie before. It's the same thing. I like how you mentioned the Cincinnati game because that's exactly how it felt. Both week 3 of this season and last season.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, but the first half when Tyler Scott and I forgot the other Cincinnati receiver name, but they were just cooking Indiana. It gets 21-0.
Ben Bryant's not that good of a quarterback.
Yeah,
either.
No.
He's a quarterback at Northwestern now, I believe. So
I did not know that.
So,
but it felt the same. I was watching that 85-yard touchdown. I was like, oof.
I mean, we
Solid movie.
could talk about this all day, but missed opportunity. That's what it comes back to.
Definitely. And I mean, many players on both sides of the ball made a lot of key plays, especially in the second half. But overall, from what you guys saw, and if you had to pick who would be your game MVP from Louisville?
I think I'm going to say either Chris Freeman or Lou Moore, because that second half does not happen without that onside kick.
Yeah.
Because if Louisville had recovered, they're recovering on Indiana's 44, and I would be willing to bet they're getting at least a field goal off of that. And again, it would just continue Louisville's momentum. So,
Yeah. Carlo?
I think it's really easy to pick Taven Jackson just because it was pretty much his first game as a starter. They came down to the 1 yard line. I mean, he was, like Mason said, Superman in the second half. Not very good in the first, but once he got the jitters out, he showed what this Indiana offense can do. I know it's only 14 points in one half, but Louisville is a much better talented team than Indiana, and for the fact that to be in that position, I mean, he's inches away from doing Mike Penix 2.0.
that was crazy.
It was,
I could not believe what I
Everyone
was
in the press box, Michael Penix.
I mean, everybody's Twitter was the same thing.
I think
Yeah.
everyone tweeted
Yeah.
that, but I mean, he's got to be, I think, the obvious game MVP from IU's side. He almost had 300 yards on the day, and his pick was a drop pass anyway. So I think he played really well, and I think Akron is going to be another tune-up game. But I will say this: I think Indiana, if he doesn't get hurt, he will probably start the rest of the year. But that's a really big if, because I can't remember the last time they've had a quarterback go through the entire time.
Eight of the last 11 years for Indiana football, the same starter has not finished it. Has finished
Wow.
the season.
That's a crazy stat.
That's really crazy.
You kind of took my answer. I was gonna also just cop out and say Taven because he was so impactful in that second half. But I'm also I'm gonna go like a different route with it. I'm gonna say Matt Guerrieri and the halftime adjustments in the second half.
Valid.
Indiana clearly did some different things defensively. He clearly changed up some play calls. Indiana brought a lot of pressure. Like after Indiana scores on that drive that they steal on the onside kick, Louisville, there was no sign in the first half that Louisville was going to be stopped again, because I believe they scored on the 3 drives heading into the half, and the only drive that they didn't score on was the one that they need out to go to the half. So clearly something changed. I think Guerrieri said on Monday that like they not only did they make some solid staff adjustments, but like also Indiana's defense just knew they weren't playing up to their standards. So I mean, we can talk Taven, we can talk the onside kick, but also like Indiana isn't in that game late if the defense doesn't play the way it did in that second half. So that's
I think that's
the way
a really
I'll go.
good point. It's a good pick.
Yeah, and I think Aaron Casey always is someone to put up for that pick. And I think especially that one play where he saw right through Louisville's offense and was right there to take down, who was it?
I don't know, because it was like a running back to a wide receiver interact. It doesn't matter who was keeping the ball. He blew that entire play up.
That was an amazing
He was
play.
going to tackle both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was the biggest play, I think, defensively of the game. And I don't think you can think of this Indiana defense without Aaron Casey. And I think that he just obviously has a big impact every game, especially multiple plays in this game. I think I had to go with him. Another person I would probably go with, Jalen Lucas, looking at his stat line. I mean, he had, 98 receiving yards and 29 rushing and then 1 receiving touchdown. I mean, it's a lot to say. I mean, every podcast, I think we've talked about how he's going to be utilized. He's obviously finding that rhythm of where he's working the most. And I think, especially in a game against, Louisville's a good team. So to see that being utilized in this way against such a good team, I think it definitely brings a lot of hope for Big Ten play.
Before we move on from talking about the defense, I want to the play. You guys remember the interception where Plummer? It was essentially like the arm punt down to the 3-yard line right before Indiana's 97-yard drive. I still don't understand how there was no pass interference or anything called on that. I forget which receiver that was intended for Louisville, but he was completely tackled almost, and the ball still ended up in his hands, but then it popped out, and I think it was Phil Dunham that was there to intercept it. But I just wanted to point that out. That was funny. I had never seen anything like that. But
I feel like there was quite a few missed calls.
Questionable.
Yeah. But
it was on both sides though.
Yeah, it was. And the players said you can't control that. Yeah. You got to worry about.
Yeah, just play. Gotta play.
Yeah, just gotta
That's
worry
the
about
hand you're
yourself.
dealt.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk a little bit about this offensive line. I mean, it's been like a complete 180 just from previous seasons, but Indiana didn't allow a single sack in week 3, which is they were the lone Big Ten team to not allow a sack in the Big Ten. What's working this season for this O-line, and especially in that game?
Bob Bostad. That's what's
Yep,
working.
That's
I
a
think
simple
that's the
answer.
That's what's working. I mean,
Matt Bedford being back. I don't really entirely understand
yeah.
what's going on right now.
So Allen said he missed a practice last
Yeah.
week, which is why he was questionable. And then Max Longman started at right guard, which Bedford's kicked in there, and they've kicked Khalil Benson out to right tackle. And then Longman got hurt. So we don't know what Longman's injury status is now, but Bedford came back in. Offensive line-wise, like I mentioned earlier, the pass protection was there. Run blocking still is suspect in some areas against more solid fronts, and Louisville has a really solid front. But I think the combination of Taven's pocket presence, which that's something that doesn't show up in spring ball and in fall practice, like that's something that can only show through when the opposing defense is actually trying to tackle you and you're not wearing a no contact jersey. That combined with the pass protection for him from the Indiana offensive line it's vastly improved, and that's Bob Bostad.
Considering that where this team was last year, I remember against Michigan they allowed 7 sacks and they lost that game up, and it was close at half. I mean, like Mason mentioned, 8 of the last 11 years, quarterback that started day 1 didn't finish. I mean, for them not to allow a single sack against a team like Louisville is very impressive, and it is crazy to see the complete 180 they've done as a program regarding the offensive line, because this unit was easily the worst on the team, I would say, last year.
The last 2 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then this year, it almost seems like their pass protection has been a strength up to this point. So if they can keep that going, that is a huge development. And you're talking about winning games with the team that kind of, you need to win some to get better recruits, more money, and all this jazz that Indiana could use. Having an offensive line is going to put you an opportunity to do so.
I think it's also not only the pure value that Bostad brings, but the sheer difference of what it was from Darren Hiller last year, which touchy subject because it's partially the reason why Michael Penix Jr. is no longer here. He couldn't stay healthy here because the O-line could not protect him. You see what he does at Washington now with a competent and healthy and strong O-line. He's like potentially the best passer in the country this year. He's a Heisman candidate. He's leading
It's very bittersweet.
Yes, right? Like it's hard for, I think, an Indiana contingent to not root for Michael Penix Jr., but not also wish and wonder like what could have been, because now you've got another star quarterback in the making, possibly. It looks like it, at least early returns with Jackson in his redshirt freshman year, and you don't want him to get hurt. If this is your starter for the next 4 years and you've got a future in this guy, then, obviously the offensive line needs to be a massive investment. So Indiana finally did that this offseason. I think it just took too long to do that. And that dates back to previous seasons and mismanagement of the program, but that's a whole different conversation. So they've done something to rectify it, but you just wonder now, was it too late? So
Yeah. Also, let's talk about, you were saying how Taven wants to reward this O-line. Sounds like he wants to take everyone out for a meal. O-line wants Texas Roadhouse. What does everyone think?
That's kind of a wild take to me. Like,
what?
I don't.
Okay.
Not a Roadhouse
Do you
fan?
like Texas Roadhouse?
Those rolls, man?
Aside from the bread, is anything else?
Yeah. I mean, it's
What, the
okay,
apple butter?
Okay, so here's the thing, right? For Taven, and he's like an NIL superstar probably on this campus, right? But like Texas Roadhouse is going to be a lot more pocket friendly than the two other options that he.
Right, he offered up nice places. And
Let's
they're
be
choosing
so
to-
for real on this podcast right now. I have been charged up about when I saw this. I cannot
I know
believe.
this is one of Carlo's favorite spots.
I cannot fathom that these offensive linemen do not want a Zagreb's ribeye. Like, come on. Are you kidding me?
It is the best steakhouse in this town by far.
Oh, it's not even. I would put it over St. Elmo's, to be honest with you. And
You had St. Elmo's?
Oh, I've had. Yeah.
Flex?
Have you not?
I have not. Whoa! I did
Wait,
not.
actually, I don't. I mean, I've had like.
You grew up in Central Indiana, didn't you?
Northern Indiana. I have
You're
never been
Northern
bougie like
Indiana.
that.
Well, I grew up in more northern than you did. You've never
North
been to St.
Central.
Elmo?
No, I don't ball like that, bro.
I don't.
But you balling up for Zagreb?
When my parents are in town,
Zagreb, that steak is unbelievable.
See, I've never been.
I
I can't
cannot
say
say anything. I
anything.
can't say
I'm not a
anything.
huge
Okay,
meat
treat-
person.
This is really just a Carlo versus
I just
Mason kind of
treat
trade-off.
yourself.
Texas.
Treat your.
I'm not a big
I'm
meat
with you.
person. If I'm gonna spend all that
I
money,
can't believe
you
they
guys
picked
know
it.
my diet situation. I was just getting flamed for my food choices.
Okay, I'm not here to argue that Texas Roadhouse is a better restaurant. Under no circumstances is it.
No, it is nice though.
But I
can
can understand why. I've never been an offensive lineman, but those boys like to eat. Like there's no, and Jackson said there's no plate limit on them. There's no plate limit on them. I know,
The
man.
steak is so good, and it's so big. It is a big piece of meat.
Listen,
You're not hungry after it.
Listen, if we're talking to the viewers, right? They would
please.
they would be doing the same thing. They would be like, why Roadhouse over Zagreb if it's being paid for, right? I don't have the answer for it. But if that's where O-line wants to go, that's where he's going to take them.
Yeah, no, please.
So, like...
All right.
The overall impact here is that he's being kept clean, and now he wants to let them clean
I think
plates.
we could talk a whole hour about this.
I don't know about that.
It's so good. I just can't get over it.
Oh, I saw this
bizarre.
on the agenda
Texas
today. And
Roadhouse.
I've never had
Roadhouse.
Malibu Grill either.
It's
Really?
I don't really. It's okay.
Oh,
I'm not a huge fan
Carlos
of it.
poo-pooing it. Womp womp.
Mid.
I just food just here doesn't compare to region food.
Whoa.
What do you think's better than Zagreb? Ain't nothing.
Okay,
Buffalo.
again, I've never.
Nothing in Buffalo.
Dude, have you ever been to Blockheads? Blockheads
No.
is good. Stacks is good.
Stacks is good, but it is nowhere close to Zagreb's.
Okay, well, again, I've
Zagreb is like
never
a top
been.
10 restaurant in the state.
I've
5.
never been. I live across from it. I
4.
smell it every single day, but I've never.
Oh, that would tempt me.
If I lived
I
there,
couldn't
oh
do
boy,
it.
my
Luckily,
pockets would be
I
empty.
am broke and can't even afford to have McDonald's for dinner. So I don't get that tempted.
Let's move on.
I got really heated. I think we need to pivot.
Got a social media clip for the week, guys. Right there. Right there.
Thank you, guys. All right. So now looking outwards, I mean, Indiana currently sits at 1-2 on the record, but they were relatively close games. And I guess we were kind of talking about it. Positives kind of came out of both losses. But do you think that this is a win that Indiana needed?
I'm pulling up the schedule right now because it's not like fresh on my mind. But I'm sitting here and I've got two thoughts in my head that Indiana's probably a better team than we thought they were in the preseason. I don't know how much more, like substantially, but at least incrementally, they are much better. They have the talent to win some games. I'm kind of looking here at like Maryland is kind of it was a swing game, right? One of those games where it's like
Maryland though.
At Maryland, I'll be there.
But the last
Shout out,
the last
but-
two times
Okay.
they
I
played.
won't.
That has no effect on the game, but I just wanted to.
Last
Mason will be there. So
Breaking news. Breaking news.
it's got to be a win then.
The last
I don't
two
know about
times
that.
they've played Maryland, though, has been close, and this team is better than the last 2 years, in my opinion.
They are talent-wise. I think they're pretty on par with Maryland. I think they're better than Michigan State. They should beat Rutgers. Rutgers is at home. You have to beat Rutgers this year.
Rutgers is homecoming.
And you get Michigan State at home this year too. So there's
And with
those
everything
are,
that Michigan State's going through.
Yeah.
like that program
bit
is
of
that
a-
program has got a lot going on right now, and they have been getting swamped every time they've taken the field so far this year. So
I'm also not entirely impressed with Purdue.
oh,
I
I'm not
think
either.
that's a Louisville game,
I'm not either.
for sure.
I'm impressed with Hudson Card. I'm not impressed with Purdue overall.
I don't know. I still think a bowl is going to be a stretch, and having that Louisville game definitely would have helped.
Okay, let's mark out with all due respect, right? Let's mark
them
out
out.
Michigan and Penn State. Okay.
What?
and probably Wisconsin.
Wisconsin's
I don't know.
ranked? Are they still ranked?
No, they're not ranked right now.
They're not ranked, but Wisconsin is
a good
borderline.
team.
Luke Fickell,
Yeah.
like that program's on the up and up. Like they will be tough. That's probably the biggest home game Indiana has this year.
Bloomington, yeah.
I think it's also questionable because
Well, they
it
had Ohio
gets
State.
a little bit into the season, and we don't know. Like, we've only had 2 games of Indiana at home. We don't know if they play like 10 times better than they're at home. And now, if Taven is a starter heading into later in the season, which I think he will be, he'll get more comfortable with this team. So this offense could completely continue to explode heading down the line. I think Wisconsin right now is a question mark, at least on my end.
I think if you're talking purely in the span of if they're going to go to a bowl game or not, yes, they absolutely needed a win on Saturday. I don't think that necessarily a bowl game was the most realistic goal this year anyways. I think you should have been looking at like 4 wins, 5 wins. That's still attainable. If you're looking at purely through the lens of, okay, is Indiana go to a bowl? Yes, they probably needed this game. But I would say, like, in a year or two, if you continue to develop where, say, Indiana wins 4 games this year or 5 games, and then they do the same thing next year.
That's the key word, though, develop.
Right. And that under
Tom Allen
under
has
this,
had some of the best recruiting classes.
there has been a lot of
just no
misdevelopment.
development.
I think I forget. I don't want to misquote him, so I know it came from Taylor Lehman, who runs Bite-Sized Bison. He looked at like the guys that are actually getting snaps for Indiana like this year, and how many of them are actually like true Indiana recruits, like that they've got out of high school and not through the transfer portal, and it is like an absurdly low number. So like it's a thing where Indiana's developed talent has transferred out. Deshaun McCullough, which partially was because of his father being on the coaching staff, but still, like, that's an Indiana recruit that is now at Oklahoma.
The highest rated of all time Indiana recruit.
Right. You've got different developed talent for Indiana being other places.
Yeah.
And then some of the other guys that you brought in just haven't developed or haven't necessarily taken the steps that you need to see from them for them to be on the field now, which is why I think partially Indiana attacked the transfer portal so hard. So the development is key. I don't know if a win was necessarily like life and death in week 3 over Louisville or not, but I would assume in the sense of a bowl, yes. But I think if you take the positives out of it and then carry that forward and just replicate what you did well, which again, that's been another issue where Indiana seemingly hasn't always been able to follow through with their own momentum, where that is more pivotal. That's more important coming out of this game rather than did you win or lose. It's, can you capitalize on what you did do well in that week?
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I mean, let's kind of pivot into our Akron talk now. We talked a lot about Louisville. As always, make sure to tune in later this week as another episode of Pack the Rock podcast will be out to go more in depth into this Akron game. But for now, we're going to give some quick predictions heading into week 4. This is Indiana's final non-conference game of the season, and Indiana is about to head into conference play for the remainder of the season now. What are your thoughts on the team and the season as a whole that you've seen in these first 3 weeks?
Well, this is the final opportunity where they can fine-tune stuff. So with Big Ten play looming and Michigan on the horizon, I think the time is now for Tom Allen to really fine-tune his offense, or I guess his defense, the whole team, really, to be honest. Now is when you find Taven's strengths. This will be his second game as a starter. This is where you find his strength, what plays work with him, what plays don't. Well, running plays work. This is when you utilize all 4 of your backs that you dress on game day, and you put them in there, and you see who's got that burst, who can help you where, and maybe situations like they would have had for Louisville if they'd known that a play worked based off something in this game later in the season. That's when they kind of tested out those plays I was talking about earlier that kind of always worked. Maybe this is the game you try those out, and you try other stuff that you wouldn't necessarily have against Big Ten opponents. Now is the time to do that. I think this game, they definitely should win by a lot. And if they get up early, maybe they throw. And this is something I was going to bring up maybe later. Do they put Swordsby in if they get a big enough lead? Now, that's a big if because considering the Idaho game last year really wasn't over until the fourth quarter. They definitely don't want to overlook this team. But if you have a big lead, that is when you can maybe put guys in that don't see a lot of field time and run plays that you wouldn't normally run. So if situations like the Louisville 1 yard line pretty much tie or lose the game happens again maybe later in the season, maybe they're a little bit more prepared.
I think, when we were talking about Indiana State, we repeatedly said that's the time to take risks. This is your chance here. But again, it's another one of those games. I don't know that it will be as much of a blowout. I feel like I'm going to say a trap game. I don't necessarily mean it as a loss, but it might not be as easy as it may seem. They were hanging in there with Kentucky for a little while. But I do think Indiana will ultimately come up on top. But they can't play down to their level and, experiment. Try out some of those risks. Something that I want to go back to is, Taven said it time and time again. He thinks that this Indiana wide receiver room is one of the best in the nation. But he also said yesterday, whenever we get the ball to Jalen Lucas, something good happens. So we just always try to get it to him. If you think you have the best wide receivers, switch it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Don't give it to Jalen all the time. That's just my thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
Just please, Walt, if for some reason he's listening,
look up the camera.
Walt,
say this to him.
Open up the playbook, man. let him figure out what you have. You have to figure out what you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the theme of this entire week is you've got one last opportunity against somebody that respectfully is not on the same level as you. This is a bad Akron football team. With all due respect to them, it is a bad Akron football team. You have to figure out what you have. If you're Indiana, you have to take risks. You have to play like you are the better team and know it. You can't just pitter patter. You can't, to use Walt's own language, you can't pitter patter. The defense has to dominate Akron. The offense should look miles better than Akron's defense. You just need to
play down to their level.
You have to overpower Akron in this game to feel good about it. I think not only to wash away the bad taste of last week, but you have to build momentum going into Maryland and conference play. So you've got the talent to do it. Just come out and show it. That's what you have to do in this game, I think. So
because none of these Big Ten games, even the ones that we can say that'll probably be a win, not a single one of them is going to be a given.
No.
So here's your chance.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go into our score predictions now. I think we're kind of talking about, we all kind of are guessing that it's going to be kind of a blowout. But what do you guys think, score predictions, if you can think of one right now?
Mason, you're the guest. Why don't you go first?
You want me to go first?
Absolutely.
I'll go 41-6.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to week 2.
Yeah. No. You are a better football team than Akron, Indiana. Show it. Why not? Please.
I don't know that I have that much faith in them.
So your trap game assessment, I'm gonna push back on it just a little bit because Akron is one of statistically, metrically the worst teams in FBS. I know Indiana is hot and cold, right? But this is a game.
I know.
Saturday night.
Know.
You're wearing your cool new uniforms.
Those are awesome.
They are.
Yeah.
You're wearing your sweet new uniforms. You're asking everybody to wear black. You're it's a night game. It's probably one of the last ones of the year. Just emphasize you're dominant. You're supposed to dominate this game.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should do that. And so that's where I'll go with my prediction.
I'm saying
28-6.
28-7.
I don't think they score a touchdown. I don't think Akron scores a touchdown.
That's what I kind of wanted to get into a little bit. Do you think that this defense does let Akron score any points at all?
Is it going to be an Indiana State situation where the defense doesn't,
exactly,
but the offense does?
Well, maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a field goal or two. I wouldn't be surprised. Akron is still a Division I football team, right? They are it's not like they have the potential to. It's not like they're just going to roll over. They went into the fourth quarter against Kentucky last week in a 2-possession game. I think it was like 17-3. They ended up losing like pretty handily, but still like there's more. You are the better. I keep going back to it. You're the better football team. Show it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say 41-6. Carlo.
I was gonna say 38-3, but certain someone also wrote that on here as I was writing it. But I'm gonna go with 35-6. Again, main thing is I don't think they get a touchdown. I think that maybe they get a field goal in the first half and one in the fourth quarter just to make it look not as bad as it is. But I think Indiana's gonna come out the gate, and I think they're gonna control this game and they're gonna win pretty handily. And I think they'll come out and they'll set the tone early. Maybe a 14-0, 21-0 first quarter. And then not necessarily coast the rest of the game, but Akron maybe will tighten up in the second quarter like we saw Indiana State did. And then they'll score in the third quarter and, kind of just ride out the game. But I think this is, like Mason said a few times, like, you are the better football team. Please show it. If there's a game to show it, I would say this game is your last opportunity the entire season to go into it knowing you are the complete and utter better football team, and you should win.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. You using like Vegas spreads, this is probably the last game where they're going to be favored.
Absolutely.
And looking at S&P Plus here, Bill Connolly runs this for ESPN Plus, but his like system predicts 34-17. I just can't see 17 points from Akron.
I think 17 is very generous.
So this Indiana team is, according to S&P Plus, the 81st best team in the country. They have the 82nd best offense, 78th best defense. You have to scroll down to number 130 for Akron, and there's 133 FBS Division I teams. They have the 120th best offense, 124th defense, and 120th special teams. So, I mean, there's not a single aspect of this game that should necessarily be close. Just emphasize that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was the certain someone
that I'm not involved
we're
in
not
right now.
gonna. I was the certain someone that said the 38-3. I don't want to talk about how my record now is 2-1 now on my guessing my record predictions or scoring predictions. I don't want to talk about it now. So I'm going with 38-3. I think I'll get to 3-1, but I think I had.
So
what
how
did
the
you
record?
choose? What did you choose?
I had
wrong?
Louisville. I know I had Indiana beting Louisville.
Oh.
So how do the records work? Is it only like who
Just
wins?
win-loss.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you get who wins. I mean, if you
Is there
get
a prize for getting the score right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Well, we did
should
at the
think
end
about
of
that.
last
Maybe some
year.
grabs.
We were all tied after week.
You're buying?
Oh,
No.
jeez. I won last year, so I'll take that. But we what we did
This
at the
is
end of
for this
last
year,
year,
Carlo, not-
we were
not last
all.
year.
I know. What we did last year is we had everyone tied at the end of week 11, and we just did whoever was the closest in the final game score. So it was like how many points off you were. I think my score was like 5 points off, and Max Rezek's was like 6. So,
Well, so what'd you get?
I got
Eat that, Max.
I got a nice dap up. And I got a pat on the back.
Great.
Let this be a debate when we keep on going through the next upcoming weeks. We'll see. Now I feel like heading into Big Ten play, our picks will be a lot different. So we'll have a very different outlook
We'll have
later
some
on.
variation.
It'll definitely
Yeah.
change.
Okay, so now we're gonna go head into our fun section of the podcast.
That's not what it's called.
It's really
Fun.
fun, I guess. Last week we did some Pack the Rock trivia on Hoosiers and the Pros, but this week we went ahead and asked some of you guys on X and Instagram to ask some questions for the podcast to answer. So how this is going to work, I'm going to ask Carlo, Kylee, and Mason the questions in which they'll give their input. Are you guys ready?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So number 1, we have a question from Josh Bodie.
Shout out.
Shout out, Josh. He asked, what do you think of Omar Cooper Jr. going from 7 catches for over 100 yards to just 1 catch for 8 yards?
Do you want me to open this?
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Mason.
Go for it.
I think part of it in Cooper's 7-catch, 100-yard performance was Indiana State. Like, you've got a redshirt freshman receiver. You wanted to get him some reps. Cam Camper went down with an injury in that game. E.J. Williams went down with an injury in that game. Camper was also back this week, so I would assume that, Camper was a much more utilized. I know he was out there for a lot of snaps. He didn't necessarily lead in targets, but looking at some of the other guys, I think Indiana had more of their skill position players that they feel more comfortable in a big game environment for this. So I would assume it was a mix of Camper being healthy and also a bit bigger of an environment. But it's hard to not see what Omar did in week 2 against Indiana State and not be excited for his future. That he's a dynamic playmaker. He's one of those young guys, too, where if he's a redshirt freshman with Jackson and he stays here with Indiana, too, like that's a dynamic duo that could continue to build. So
that would be a dynamic duo.
Yeah.
It'd be like if Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. Obviously, it's a joke. Obviously, I know. I'm still hurting too. Wow. But I think the development
of expect to get punched in the face on this podcast.
Oh my god!
Well,
Everyone's a Packers fan.
Mason, I feel your pain. That Monday night game was hard. Even he's not wearing the
Sorry,
he's wearing
Audrey's a Packers
jersey.
fan too.
I'm outnumbered.
I know, Kylee.
Your team looked really good last night.
Steel curtain.
Mason had the pleasure of getting to watch it with me.
Yeah,
Jeez,
I did.
Pleasure. I think
you were invited.
I was at home. I'm just going to sleep. I don't even think I made it to the end of the game. I'm not going to lie.
I didn't make it to the end of the game either. That game took forever.
I was out. But I think Omar Cooper Jr., him and Cam Camper can form quite the duo at receiver. And, he goes for over 100, and then he has 1 catch for 8 yards. It's really just kind of – sometimes that happens with receivers. And if this almost would be good, essentially, in a sense where they don't necessarily game plan for him as much, maybe the way that Indiana State did, because they didn't really know who he was. And then he goes off. And then people are like, oh, wow, this guy can play. Let's game plan for him. Now he's got 1 catch for 8 yards. But if you have a tandem like those two, it's going to be hard to game plan for both of them, shutting them down. And I think just necessarily in this sense, they game plan a little bit more for Cooper than Cam Camper. But, neither of them had a great game against Louisville, to be honest. But Jalen Lucas was honestly the best, probably the best receiver that Indiana had that game. Other than Camper's big catch, I don't really remember much impact that he had.
Well, I think also a byproduct of Taven getting more comfortable in that game was he spread the ball around to, I think, 8 different receivers had a catch. So,
yeah.
The offensive production was much more spread around. And we're obviously only looking at really one half of offensive production from Indiana in this game. So I don't think there's too much to worry about with Cooper. I think that game is more something where heading into next season or the season after that, like you look back and be like, okay, this guy's shown flashes of being able to do it. He's just going to be counted on more in those situations. So
I think you've completely hit the nail on the head here.
Thank you, Kylee.
You're welcome, Mason. This isn't something that I'm too concerned about. I think he's shown the potential, and looking forward, it's a good look for Indiana. But when you have Cam Camper back, he was great this last game. So.
Yep, definitely. Going on to it, Dylan Beach. We have a question from Dylan Beach. Do you think that Taven will keep the quarterback job when Dexter Williams is healthy again?
I love this question because if you would have asked me this 3 weeks ago, I would have said absolutely not. And now I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think I do.
I think there's. I think you stick with Taven.
Yeah, I think you plan around Taven until he's. I say until. If he gets hurt, then you pivot. But yeah. I think actually the conversation that we should probably have is when Dexter's healthy, does he immediately slot into your backup role, or do you feel better about Brendan Sorsby now? It's because Sorsby has had more recent game experience. Dexter last year, I know he kind of was a spark at the end of the year last year, but there was still not a ton of game experience from him either. So I think Taven is your guy right now until he shows otherwise, or you're forced to pivot otherwise. But I think they have something in him. Yeah. He's got the poise. He's got the metal for the big moment, I think. So I know it's a small sample size, but I would want some stability at quarterback if I was Indiana.
That's too much whiplash for the offense.
Yeah.
But I also think Michael Penix said last week, a few weeks ago, whatever, he did an interview and said that before the Iowa game, his doctor called him and said, I'm not clearing you, but if you want to play, you can play. And
That's
that's
so sketch.
insane.
That's
So
Did you see the quote where he was like, I used to lay on the floor and
Yes.
pray to God after
That
my teammates
hurts.
left? Like,
Yep.
I always felt so bad for him. I remember there's an interview I remember, or a quote at least, and someone said like, who's your person? Something along those lines. I don't know what it was, but he was like, oh, I'm just happy to see my dogs. Like, it's the only person that's not mad at me.
Oh my
That's so
gosh.
sad.
Jeez, someone
But
needs
if
to
I'm
hug.
Indiana and my
Man's
former
best friend.
quarterback, who is a Heisman candidate, is saying, yeah, the medical staff was like, sure, you can kind of do
Yeah.
whatever. I am not letting Dexter out there, who is also coming back from a knee injury. I know they said mid-season, maybe before.
it is an interesting question, knowing you bring up a good point where, like, 3 weeks ago, I think this is a much different conversation.
Yeah.
Because
Even, honestly, like a week and a half ago.
although
last
he's
week.
been listed as out, he's dressed out. He warms
Yeah.
up every
Yep.
single game. He's in full pads
But
and uniform.
out.
Oh, but inactive.
Yeah.
That was no.
keynote.
Mason, it's a whole thing.
It's a bit.
Oh, it's a bit.
Yeah.
Damn, we didn't.
No,
we didn't
that was
fill
supposed
him
to.
in.
That was supposed to. Yeah, we'll fill you in after. but
Okay.
Trust me, we know he's inactive, but he's fully dressed. I think that development is insane, though.
Oh, I get it.
I
think I get it.
Yeah.
Took a second.
Okay, I get it. Dressed in pads.
Yeah.
Dressed to play football. Carlo. He's dressed to play football, although he's inactive.
Yeah.
You know,
All right, maybe I'm still missing
let's
it.
keep the ball rolling.
Next question.
All right, next question.
I think
we
Taven's
have,
your guy.
next
Short
question.
answer, Taven's your guy.
We
Taven's the guy.
have from Hayden King asking, can the offense play all 4 quarters like they did in the second half against Louisville?
If they call the plays the same way.
I think that's the biggest takeaway from the game was their aggressive play calling because, like you talked about with Ohio State, they really weren't playing to win the game. They were being very conservative. And honestly, I think if they just take more risks like that, you're probably going to have more turnovers, but you also probably will have more points because they were very aggressive in the second half. And those 2 scoring drives where they got touchdowns weren't the only ones that it seemed like they were consistently kind of getting to at least the other side of the 50.
They were moving the ball.
They were absolutely removing the ball. I think they just, they need to have more hair in their chest when they're calling those plays.
Whoa.
I just don't know the last game that Indiana played 4 quarters.
That's a really good point.
Can you maybe
There's one
the
that's popping to head.
the former football people?
There's one that's popping into my head from last year, I think. But I
It's
just
got to be like Michigan State.
no.
But, like, they
what?
they
didn't
weren't in
play
that in the
that.
first half.
They
Yeah.
were down 17
I remember-
points.
They weren't
I
like
left the TV to go get food. I
Jeez.
came back
I mean,
and was like,
the fact that we even gotta think about this though is disturbing, honestly, because if they can't put together a whole fourth quarter or a whole game, and we got to think the last 2 seasons, like you wonder why they only got 4 wins last year and why
Okay, I'm actually
this
going to
year.
I'm going to give an answer. I'm going to go back to
Oh,
2021 when they beat Idaho 56-14 at
Oh,
home.
I mean, didn't they get like 2 return touchdowns that game too?
Yeah. What
That was
it?
a complete beatdown.
Yeah, I mean, and that was obviously 21, so that was the year there was a ton of hype coming off the 2020
Yeah.
season.
Oh, no,
And there was still like not necessarily like an assurance of the kind of rollover that happened to Iowa, if that was like just an anomaly, or if that was like just if that was gonna be what Indiana was that year. Yeah, that's probably the game, but that's 2 years ago, 2 calendar years ago. So,
that's just crazy.
but they have a chance to do it this week.
They do.
They have a chance to do it
They
this
do.
week. They call
Will they?
If they call the plays like this, they did for the last 30 minutes for 60 minutes, then yes, they can play offense like that all 4 quarters. I think, at least.
All right, next question. We have from the one and only William McDermott.
Derm.
Shout out.
What unit has to be better on the defensive side of the ball?
I was really disappointed in the pass defense this week.
Yeah.
They looked, they held, why am I blinking? Marvin Harrison Jr. and
Egbuka.
right, one of the best receiver rooms, even though Taven says Indiana's one of the best receiver rooms. I mean, these are future NFL stars, supposed to be. And
They will be.
They held them. And Jamari Thrash is incredible. He's done an amazing job. They should have held him too. So
they should have done at least a better job.
A
It seemed
better
like
job,
every
for
single
sure.
time he was running a deep route, they were throwing him the ball, and he was getting it almost
they
every
were
time.
beat every single time.
Yeah, it was that I think
It got better in the second half.
They looked really vulnerable in the
Yeah.
first half.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The
Yep.
secondary's got to play better.
Yeah, I think we're probably pretty much all across the board where it's the defensive backs.
Yeah.
But they've also, like, heading into this year, we knew that the D-line, even though it was, like, vastly different, it was probably going to produce. The linebackers are always good under Tom Allen. It's, like, one of the things that is true about every single team he has is, like, his linebackers are always solid. But there were so many question marks with this defensive back group. And it's probably going to be that way all year long. They're probably going to have performances like Ohio State again and probably get beat on some plays like they did in the Louisville game to just make you scratch your head. So when you're combining this many players into one and asking a lot of these guys to not have an individual breakdown when it's so many new faces trying to form a cohesive unit, that's probably the group where that's where the most importance lies on the defense because they're the last level of defense. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Ryan Canfield asks, who is the biggest disappointment so far, whether it be a player or a coach or both?
This question also punches you in the face. I don't want to answer this one first.
As far as the team goes, player-wise, at the beginning of the season, I cannot lie, the bar was on the floor. I did not have any expectations for anyone, so I haven't been disappointed by any players. I have been disappointed by some coaching plays, which I think that's probably all across the board. Disappointed, not surprised.
I'm going to give the answer that Twitter is going to like.
Are you going for a clip right here?
Walt Bell has to be better. We talked about this plenty of times with the play call, whatever, but he's got to call a better game. That is a big reason why they lost. I'm not going to say it's the reason why they lost, but it's a very big reason why they did not win that game on Saturday. He's got to be better. He's got to take more risks. I understand you have a young quarterback. You have a young offense. But your offensive line is one thing that is solidified. In your running back room, you've got guys that can go on the outside. You've got guys that can go up the middle. What more could you want? You got two guys that are two decent receivers. I mean, you've got a Clemson transfer that is your third. Obviously, he's hurt, but even still, you got 3 weeks with him. You got to call a better game. You got to be more aggressive. You have the pieces. You've seen that he can play now, your quarterback. What else on your offense are you unsure about?
Not to keep dogging on Walt Bell, but I will. I think he's the only real logical answer to this because when he was hired, right, he already came in with a ton to prove because he came from UMass where he was 2-23 as a head coach.
He was already, on the down.
Like,
You need to hire someone on the up.
Like, I remember the reaction on social media when he was announced. It was like, that's the guy? Like... And Indiana, in the past, when they've been successful, has had really good coordinators. Tom Allen has had really good coordinators in 19 and 20. Now those guys are head coaches. Kane Womack in South Alabama just walked into, was it Oklahoma State last week, and trounced them by 26 points. Obviously, Kalen DeBoer, who was the offensive coordinator for those 2 years, is lighting it up with Washington and Indiana's former starting quarterback. But the replacements for these guys have not been up to. Now I like Matt Guerrieri, so I'm excluding the defense out of this. This is purely talk about Indiana's offense. I think last year he was kind of afforded he's new to the system.
Yeah.
Don't really know. We didn't really know what Indiana had skill position player wise last year, anyways, and now It's shown through in flashes where he has stretches of really good play calls and it really just hums and Indiana's offense moves down the field and they have the guys to do it. But then you get to certain situations and it kind of shines through as you can see why he was 2-23 as a head coach. You can see why there was such backlash and why there's still so many question marks surrounding him and his tenure in this coaching staff because Indiana has more than what they're showing on offense, and if he doesn't end up showing it, it might ultimately be his downfall here. So I think he's the only logical answer. But that's not to say it can't change, because he's got, I think, the players to change this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
But
he has the players.
I think
definitely.
so far, he's the only answer.
All right, final question, last but not least, from the one and only Riley Woodall. Was it poor coaching or player inefficiency that lost IU the game against Louisville?
I think it was a little bit of both. Ultimately, coaching.
Yeah.
I would say coaching. I think a lot of the mistakes they made were mental mistakes. Not to say that isn't on the players, but a lot of that is on the coaching. And like we've bashed Walt Bell for the last 5 minutes, but I mean, the coaching has got to be better, just all across the board. Everyone's just got to step up just a little bit if they want to get this team to bowl eligibility.
The coaching. I don't want to like keep harping on it. But I know you brought up the buyout early in the podcast, but like later this year, I think after December 1st, it drops like significantly, like $13 million from around the $20 million mark to like the $7 million mark.
It goes down, and it goes down every single year from now on.
So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say Tom Allen's on the hot seat. I think it's way too early to have that conversation, because I think most of the management things sometimes
So this
are
is a topic that Carlo is very passionate about. Like,
you think he's on the hot seat?
do you
How
want to
could
get
you
into
not?
this right now?
How could you not think he's on?
I think his seat's warm.
Oh, it's definitely warm. It's definitely you're touching it. Oof, it's warm.
He got them seat warmers.
You got
I
this.
just think I think I would go back to, if he ultimately is done in, is he hasn't hired the correct coordinators around him. I think he's a good recruiter.
Yeah.
He has his faults here and there, game management wise. Saturday was not his best work as a game manager with the timeout management and that kind of stuff. But the coordinators that he's entrusting, he's found a good one in Matt Guerrieri. Has he found one to replace Kalen DeBoer yet? Is Walt Bell your answer? I don't know. If he continues to ride with Walt Bell and it doesn't work out, does Walt get fired? Does Tom get fired? Like, how serious is the athletic administration going to take it? Like, there's a ton of factors, but obviously it's not like his job is entirely secure. I'm not going to say that. I just don't think he's like imminent to get fired mid-season. You know what I mean?
No,
Like,
No.
Definitely not.
Yeah, definitely not.
I don't think he'll get fired mid-season, but you brought up a lot of good points there. One thing he has created for this team, which is arguably one of the harder things to do, is culture.
Yeah.
The players believe in him, and the
They've
guys
bought in.
Oh,
They have bought
absolutely.
in.
And the players on the team are full.
They love him.
They're full
Yeah.
Allen. They look at him.
They come
much
here
more than a
for
coach.
him.
Yeah, and that is one of the hardest things to have as a head coach, and he does have that. So the potential for him to still get good recruits is very much alive because of that culture that he's created, even though they're not winning games.
I think that's what makes it such a double-edged sword. Like, this conversation is like, this is year 7 under Tom Allen. He's like the 4th longest tenured head coach in the conference. And I think he's up there with Harbaugh, James Franklin, and Ferentz at Iowa. And I think I'm missing one more. But, like, those are, like, guys that have a track record of success and getting to bowl games and winning games and developing talent. And Indiana, and I know Indiana is not on par with those programs, right? But Indiana in that time has gone to 2 bowl games, has not won either of them, and is still like unsure of what direction they're going, right? Like, Iowa, you can always pencil in for 8 wins. Penn State, you can pencil in for 9 or 10. Same thing for Michigan. Like,
Ohio State.
But Ryan Day is not as long tenured.
No,
I don't think.
I didn't really. Yeah, I was just saying. Sorry,
but
continue.
like using the teams that have had a head coach as long as Indiana has, and Indiana has had Allen in the system since 16. There's just, at some point, you look at a guy and you're like, listen, man, you've done a lot of good things for this program, but there's not a direction. And I think if Allen is ultimately, if his ties are cut to this university at some point in the next couple of years, I think that ultimately would be the reason. I don't think, because like Indiana has never been a program that's been expected to get to bowl games every year, but there always just needs to be some sort of direction.
Yeah.
And Indiana just kind of seems like they're like floating, like
Yeah.
they're hard to make out, right? So I think that's what it comes down to.
All right. Well, that'll be it for our fun part of the section. Fun section of the podcast. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Pack the Rod Pack the Rod podcast. Here we go. Mason, thank you for coming on. Happy you were able to join us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, this was definitely a lot of fun. I've been Audrey Marr, joined alongside Kylee Corman and Carlo Barone for the Hoosier Network. Make sure to keep up with Hoosier Network on TikTok, X, Instagram,
Twitter,
Spotify,
all that jazz.
It's Twitter until we have to start paying to use it. So.
Oh yeah, that's a whole nother podcast in itself. So we'll all be at Memorial Stadium on Saturday for all you need to know. So stay tuned for more content, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Later.
Oh, yo.